All right, guys, welcome back to another Master and Apprentice video and podcast. How you doing today, Afton?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing today, Sammy?
I'm great. We got another book review. We've got the next book in the Thrawn trilogy. We just reviewed the Thrawn novel a couple weeks ago. If you guys want to check that video out, there should be a card on the top of the screen. Today, we're going to be reviewing the Thwawn Alliance. It's the second book in the trilogy. Now, this was kind of knotted at the end of the Thrawn novel, with Vader and Thrawn kind of meeting up and Thrawn dropping Skywalker's name a couple of times throughout the book. So we knew this book was kind of coming, and kind of like the background story of how Thrawn knew Anakin Skywalker, right? And that's part of the reason Palpatine had an interest in Thrawn. So with that, we get the backstory of this, and it's a classic, backstory telling novel where it flips from the present to past, and it kind of tries to tell a story of how these two have history, and then it also tries to intertwine the new story and connecting them two. But we're not going to try reviewing it that way. We're going to kind of review the two separate stories on their own timeline, talk about them. The first story we're going to talk about is the history part, where Anakin Skywalker was on a mission to find Padme. Padme had gone to the Outer Rim, to Batuu, which, funny enough, is the planet that you go to if you go to Disney World. It's Galaxy's Edge. So that's, a little bit canon there for you guys. So he can't find her. She doesn't talk to him. So he's on a mission to go find her. And essentially he finds Thrawn there. And they kind of begin a relationship, and Thrawn kind of agrees to help find Padme. And it's a pretty simple story. It's really not that intriguing. Anakin and Thrawn work together. They help find this factory that Padme's kind of been captured in. Padme kind of tricked these factory workers into holding her prison for ransom, but they weren't really holding a prisoner. They were just, she tricked them into it. That lets you know the kind of the story it was. So it's a factory that is making droids and droid armor with cortosis. Now, if you've watched the recent Acolyte episode, this is a big thing. It's one of the few lightsaber resistant materials in the known Star Wars universe. And if you kind of get the idea, if they were coating droids in cortosis armor, that would be very bad for the clones in the Grand Republic's army, right? So essentially, Thrawn, Padme, and Anakin blow it up, and there's really not much else to the story. I mean, I'm trying to think and remember, but there wasn't much else. It was just kind of the foundation of Thrawn and Anakin, how they get to know each other, the different aspects of how they view the Force and their society, because at this time, Thrawn is still part of the Chiss Ascendancy, his species government system, right? But there's not really like anything that's super important. Now, if we go to the main story, that's kind of where more of the important plot happens. It kind of starts out with Palpatine kind of forces Thrawn and Vader to work together. It's kind of obvious they don't get along that well. Vader's threatened Thrawn a couple times, and Thrawn's kind of made Vader look dumb a couple times, right? And Palpatine makes them work together. He knows that they know each other, but they don't really know that they know each other, right? At least not yet. And obviously, Vader knows that that's Thrawn, but he doesn't know that Thrawn knows he's Anakin. But that's never really established. So for the time being, they're still separate. They don't know who each other is technically. At the end of the book, Thrawn kind of has some suspicions that that's Anakin. So they go out and they go through this big mysterious ride of trying to figure out what's happening. And it's kind of obvious that in the background, Thrawn is working on his own side project, along as well the Palpatine's side mission, right? So he's kind of working on it too. And Vader doesn't like this, and it kind of comes out to the establishment of the Chiss Ascendancy and how they view the Force. Thrawn essentially is explaining to them that the Grisk, which is another alien species that's very dangerous, very evil, are a threat to the Empire. And he keeps trying to establish this, while at the same time trying to save and help out the Chiss Ascendancy, which, kind of makes him look suspicious. And so they're just kind of trying to settle this throughout. They don't really come to any sounding resolution. They beat the Grist and the Grist station that was there. And so they're not able to really start this giant war or anything, but they are able to kind of hold off like the beginning invasion of a Grisk invasion. If you're getting the memo throughout this, you just kind of realize there wasn't anything that happened that was so profound. There's lots of small things, right? Like kurtosis. That's kind of a big thing to introduce to Star Wars. And we had Beskar, but another thing, kurtosis, which can kind of like coat other materials. That's a big thing to introduce, and we see it implemented now in Acolyte. So that's a cool thing to establish in this book. That's a big thing. The relationship between Anakin and Thrawn and throwing Padme in there, that's a big thing that could kind of, work into the story later down the line. And then the main story, obviously establishing the Chiss and the Grisk and the relationship between Palpatine, Vader, and Thrawn, all of that, that's really big stuff, right? But like, there's not really one big bad antagonist. Obviously, the Grisk are the big bad, but like, I mean, they kind of like keep killing them off in waves, and then more come, and it's interesting. It really is, but like, it's nothing so profound. It's very obvious that this is leading up to another story. Like, this is just the middleman. This isn't some grandiose storyline. It's just trying to develop a bigger part of the story, which you can't fault it for that. But at the same time, it doesn't make it all that interesting.
Yeah, this book was definitely made with a trilogy in mind. And another thing, if you're looking at this book, I mean, as a reader, I love it. I like reading it. I like going through all these different small, cool things that are happening. But it's just a bunch of character development at the end of the day. That's not a bad thing necessarily. But at one point, we see Thrawn use this way to get a comm system working when all systems are jammed. And he has to put a ton of effort into it. Anakin's like, you just did like 10 different things to put the comms up. And how does this work for you? And he's like, well, I spent an hour doing it, but I have communication and you don't. And he's like, well, that's a good point. And there's just these other small things that are just character development. It's not bad. I enjoyed reading it, but when I go back on it, it feels a lot like A New Dawn, where there's a lot of character development for these cool characters, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really feel like it affects the plot a whole lot. The Grisks are a cool thing to introduce. The kurtosis is also a very cool metal, but it's put in kind of like the subplot, right? It's not really the most important part of the book. And if you ask me what the most important part of the book is, I'd say it's Thrawn and Vader's relationship.
So with all of that, I think I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. It was like a filler, right? Like a filler episode in a TV series. But I think it did a lot of establishing and lore canon. It wasn't bad by any means. And if you're going to plan on reading this trilogy, this Thrawn trilogy, it's definitely something you should read, but just go in knowing it's not going to be the most intriguing, grandiose story. It's just going to have a lot of development, and it's going to build up the next trilogy and the end of the trilogy very well, right? It gets you excited for the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy. It starts to get you excited about all that stuff with the Grisk and the Chiss Ascendancy. And then it gets you excited for the next coming novel with Palpatine and Thrawn's storyline kind of coming to an end. So overall, it's a pretty good story. I think with the way I rate episodes, I would probably rate it the same as this. I'd probably throw it in the B tier. It was fun. I liked it. I don't know if I would rate it higher than Brotherhood or lower. I think it's somewhere I'd throw it. I think somewhere in that area. I do think I want to reestablish Ahsoka kind of going to the top of B. I just think it brought more to the story because it kind of was the end of her story as a adolescent, and it kind of brought her into adulthood, which it wasn't the most intriguing, interesting story, but I think it was more captivating than these other two, right? These other two just had kind of development in the storylines, and I think Ahsoka did more of an ascension and a peak into the end of the story than these two. Where would you put it?
I like your assessment that Ahsoka goes higher than Brotherhood, and the top of B definitely. I think I'd put Thrawn a little bit below Brotherhood. Maybe I'm just more of a fan of those characters, and I love Thrawn and Vader too, but I loved seeing Obi-Wan and Anakin's relationship a lot, so that might be a bit of my bias, but I think they're about on the same level. I really do.
I would say Brotherhood and Thrawn Alliance are very similar. I could make an argument for either. Not bad either way. I did enjoy it, and if you're looking for a book to read, go ahead and read this. Just know it's part of a trilogy. It's not that captivating on its own.
So in our tier list, it goes S, A, B, C, D. In S tier, we have Star Wars Dark Disciple, and then we have the original Thrawn book, and then we have Bloodline. And in our A tier, we have Dooku Jedi Lost, and then we have Tarkin. In our B tier, we have the Ahsoka book, which is now at the top, Brotherhood, and then the Thrawn Alliances book. And then in our C tier, we have A New Dawn. D tier, we don't have anything yet.
So there you guys have it. Let us know what you guys think of this book, if you guys have read it or not. We definitely recommend reading it. Let us know what you guys think of the review down in the comments. If you guys are on podcast, don't forget to hit that download and follow. It helps out the channel a whole lot. And if you guys are on YouTube, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe.
Peace.